I don't understand. I followed every protocol. I would never do this.
This is just a formality. Please cooperate.
She was the one who always followed the rules, but today everything fell apart. On the morning it began, the light came through the kitchen window the way it always did. Soft, pale, almost apologetic, as if it knew what the day would become and was already trying to be gentle. The kettle clicked off by itself, releasing a thin ribbon of steam that fogged the air for a moment before disappearing. She stood there longer than necessary, her fingers wrapped around the handle of the mug, feeling the heat sink into her skin, grounding her. Mornings were predictable. That was what she liked about them. Predictable meant safe. Predictable meant controllable. Predictable meant nothing could surprise you enough to hurt you. She glanced at the clock, the same one she had checked every morning for the last 11 years, and noted, again, that she was exactly on time. Not early, not late, just on time. Her reflection in the microwave door looked calm, composed, almost practiced, hair pinned back neatly, clothes ironed the night before. No wasted motion, no wasted emotion. People often mistook that for coldness. But it wasn't. It was discipline. It was survival. As she locked her apartment door behind her, she did what she always did, paused, tested the handle twice, then once more for good measure. A small ritual, a promise to herself that nothing had been left undone. She didn't know that this would be the last morning she would ever believe that. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. Someone had left a delivery box near the stairs, and she gently nudged it aside so no one would trip. She always did things like that, small, invisible acts of care that no one noticed, but everyone benefited from. Outside, the city was waking up in fragments, engines starting, feet on pavement, snippets of conversation breaking apart as people passed each other without really seeing. She walked with her usual measured pace, eyes forward, mind already replaying the list of tasks she would complete before noon. At work, she was known as dependable, not brilliant, not flashy. Dependable, the kind of person you trusted with the details others overlooked, the kind of person who stayed late without being asked, who double-checked numbers no one else bothered to verify, who followed procedure even when shortcuts were encouraged. She believed rules existed for a reason. She believed truth had structure. She believed that if you did the right thing consistently enough, eventually the world would notice. When she stepped into the building that morning, the security guard nodded at her the same way he always did, a silent acknowledgement. She nodded back, already reaching for her badge. The scanner beeped. Green light. Entry granted. Another small confirmation that she belonged here, that this place, with its humming lights and polished floors, was part of the life she had built brick by brick. Her desk was exactly as she'd left it, neat, controlled. She placed her bag beneath it, booted up her computer, and took a moment to breathe. Somewhere across the office, someone laughed. Phones rang. The copy machine jammed, as it often did. Normal noises, normal problems, normal life. The email arrived at 9:17 a.m. It wasn't dramatic, no flashing warning, no red exclamation marks, just a subject line that read, "Urgent, please come to conference room B." She felt a subtle tightening in her chest, like a string being pulled just a little too hard. She scanned the sender's name, Human Resources. Her mind immediately began flipping through possibilities, searching for something, anything she could have missed. Had she filed a report incorrectly, missed a deadline, forgotten a form? The list ran quickly, efficiently, and ended where it always did. Nothing. Still, she stood, smoothed her sleeves and walked down the corridor, heels echoing softly against the floor. Each step felt heavier than the last, though she couldn't have said why. Conference room B was usually reserved for orientation sessions or quarterly updates. Not this, not an urgent summons mid-morning. When she entered, the room felt colder than it should have. 3 people sat at the table. 2 she recognized immediately. 1 she didn't. The unfamiliar man wore a dark jacket and had the stillness of someone trained to observe rather than participate. The others avoided her eyes. "Please, have a seat," someone said, voice too practiced, too neutral. As she sat, the door closed behind her with a quiet finality that seemed to echo far louder in her head. She folded her hands in her lap, posture straight, waiting. She noticed how the fluorescent light flickered slightly above the table. She wondered if anyone else noticed. There was a pause. Papers shuffled. A breath was taken. "We've received a serious allegation," the woman from HR began, her tone careful, deliberate. An allegation regarding your conduct. The word allegation felt foreign in her ears, like it belonged to another language. Her mind reached for meaning and found none. I don't understand, she said slowly. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. What kind of allegation? Another pause. The man she didn't know leaned forward slightly. His eyes were sharp, not unkind, but assessing, measuring. You are being accused of falsifying internal records, he said, specifically financial compliance documents. The room seemed to tilt just a little, as if gravity had shifted without warning. That's impossible, she said immediately, the words leaving her before fear could catch them. I would never. We're not here to debate intent, the HR woman interrupted softly. We're here to establish facts. Facts. She had always trusted facts. Facts were solid. Facts didn't bend under pressure. Facts didn't care about feelings. Facts would save her. She asked questions, careful, precise questions. What records? Which dates? Who had raised the concern? Each answer landed like a small dull blow, vague, non-committal, confidential, under review. They told her to turn in her badge, to log out of her computer, to wait at home until further notice. Administrative leave, they said. Standard procedure. She stood up slowly, her legs suddenly unfamiliar, like she was borrowing them from someone else. As she walked back to her desk, eyes followed her. She felt them on her back, sharp and curious. Whispers followed, low and indistinct, but loaded with meaning. She packed her bag with hands that trembled, despite her effort to control them. The security guard didn't meet her eyes this time. Outside, the city felt louder, harsher, as if it had lost whatever softness it had offered that morning. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, clutching her bag, unsure what to do next. Her routine had been shattered, and with it, her sense of direction. She started walking without choosing a destination, the accusation replaying itself in her mind over and over, each time growing heavier. By the time she reached her apartment, her phone was vibrating non-stop. Messages from co-workers, some concerned, some cautious, some already distant. One message from her sister simply said, "What's going on?" No punctuation, no judgment. Yet, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall. For the first time in years, there was nothing on her schedule, no tasks to complete, no problems to solve. Just a vast, terrifying emptiness filled with questions she didn't know how to answer. The investigation moved quickly. Faster than she thought it would. Too fast. Emails became notices. Notices became statements. Her name was suddenly attached to words like misconduct and breach of trust. People she had worked with for years stopped responding to her messages. Some blocked her entirely. Others offered hollow reassurances that felt more like apologies for associating with her at all. What hurt most wasn't the accusation itself. It was the sudden rewriting of her identity. The woman who followed rules became the woman who must have broken them. The dependable one became the liability. The silence around her grew thick, oppressive, as if the world itself had decided her story was already written. Late at night, she replayed every decision she had ever made, every form she had signed, every report she had filed. She imagined invisible eyes watching her, judging her, waiting for her to admit guilt she didn't understand. Sleep came in fragments, filled with dreams where she tried to speak and no sound came out. Weeks passed, then months, and then the truth began to surface. It came not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet crack in the narrative that had been built around her. A junior analyst, someone barely out of training, came forward after discovering a pattern he didn't understand at first. Numbers that matched her reports exactly, but originated from a different source. A system vulnerability, an access log no one had initially reviewed. Someone else had been using her credentials. The realization hit the company like a delayed explosion. The man who had accused her so confidently avoided eye contact now. The HR emails changed tone. Apologies crept in, tentative and incomplete. The real culprit was eventually identified. A supervisor, someone with authority, someone who knew exactly how to hide behind procedure and let someone else take the fall. When they called her back in, when they offered reinstatement, when they spoke of clearing her name, she listened in silence. The damage had already been done. Her reputation, her sense of safety, her faith in the system she had trusted so deeply. She walked out of the building one final time, not as an accused woman, but not as the same woman who had entered it all those years ago. Later, sitting alone by her window, watching the city move on without her, she thought about rules, about truth, about how fragile dignity could be when placed in the hands of others. She understood now that following the rules had never guaranteed protection, that being good had never been a shield. But she also understood something else. She had survived being erased, and that meant she could rebuild herself, not as the woman who always followed the rules, but as the woman who knew who she was, even when the world tried to tell her otherwise. And that knowledge, hard-earned and deeply scarred, was something no one could ever take from her. She sat there, long after the light outside had faded into a grey-blue blur, the city noises thinning into something distant and hollow, as if the world were moving underwater, while she remained still, anchored by the weight of everything that had happened. The reinstatement letter lay unopened on the table, its envelope already creased from where she had gripped it too tightly earlier, fingers digging into paper as if it might resist her anger, her grief, her confusion. They had used words like regret and oversight and procedural failure, words polished smooth until they almost sounded harmless, as though what they had taken from her could be replaced with vocabulary alone. She tried to remember the version of herself from before, the woman who believed systems worked, the woman who trusted that accountability flowed upward as much as it flowed down. That version of her felt distant now, like a character from a documentary she might watch late at night, shaking her head and whispering, "You have no idea what's coming." She wondered when exactly she had crossed the line from naive to awake, whether it had happened in that conference room, or during the long afternoons alone in her apartment, or in the moments she watched her reflection in the mirror and failed to recognize the eyes staring back. The aftermath didn't resolve cleanly. It never did. Clearing her name didn't erase the whispers that lingered in hallways she no longer walked. It didn't undo the way her phone stopped ringing, or how friends chose their words carefully now, as though she were fragile glass. Some apologized openly, their guilt spilling out in awkward sentences and nervous laughter. Others never reached out at all, and that silence cut deeper than accusation ever had. Silence meant a decision had been made. Silence meant she wasn't worth the discomfort of admitting they'd been wrong. She tried returning to work once, if only to see whether she could. The building felt different the second time, smaller, tighter, the air heavier. People looked up as she passed, surprise flickering across their faces before they masked it with polite neutrality. She smiled when spoken to, nodded when necessary, answered questions with precision. But inside, something recoiled at every sound, every glance. Her body remembered the humiliation even when her mind tried to focus on tasks. Trauma, she would later realize, lived in muscle and breath long before it ever formed coherent thoughts. She didn't stay long, a week, maybe two, enough time to understand that restoration wasn't the same as healing, that reinstatement was not redemption. She handed in her resignation with hands steadier than she felt, listening as her manager spoke about understanding and regret and wishing things had been different. She wondered if he believed his own words, or if they were simply another script learned after the damage was already done. When she walked out that day, the doors sliding shut behind her, with the same soft sound as always, she felt something unexpected beneath the exhaustion. Relief. It was quiet, subtle, almost shy, but it was there. Relief at no longer having to prove anything to a place that had been so willing to discard her. The months that followed were slow and uneven. Time lost its structure without her routines, and some days stretched endlessly, while others disappeared without warning. She filled the silence with long walks, with books she read twice, because her mind drifted midway through each page, with conversations she rehearsed but never had. She thought often about injustice, not in abstract terms, but in the intimate way it enters a life and rearranges it. She thought about how easily authority could masquerade as truth, how systems designed to protect could become weapons when combined with fear and convenience. At night, memories returned uninvited. The sound of her badge hitting the table, the way the HR representative avoided her eyes, the subtle satisfaction she'd seen flicker across the real culprit's face in moments she'd only understood in hindsight. Those memories carried their own physical sensations, tightness in her throat, a buzzing beneath her skin, a shallow panic that rose without warning. Healing, she discovered, wasn't linear. Some days she felt almost whole again. Other days, she felt as though she were back in that conference room, small and voiceless. But something else began to grow in the quiet. Anger. Not the explosive kind, but a steady, clarifying force. An anger that asked hard questions and refused easy answers. Why had it been so simple to believe she was guilty? Why had no one questioned the narrative until it became inconvenient not to? Why had her years of integrity weighed less than a single unverified claim? She started writing things down. At first, just fragments, sentences scribbled in the margins of notebooks, thoughts she was afraid to forget, then longer reflections, detailed accounts of what had happened, how it felt, what it revealed. Writing gave shape to the chaos, turned pain into something she could examine rather than just endure. Through words, she reclaimed control over her own story. Eventually, people began to find those words. Quietly, at first, a message from someone she didn't know, thanking her for articulating something they had never been able to name. Another from a former colleague who admitted they'd stayed silent out of fear. Each message was small, but together they formed a pattern, one she hadn't expected. Her experience wasn't isolated, it was disturbingly familiar. That realization changed something fundamental within her. The story was no longer just about what had been done to her, it was about what could happen to anyone who believed doing the right thing was enough. It was about the cost of convenience in systems that valued speed over fairness, reputation over truth. She began speaking publicly, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Not with bitterness, but with precision. She described the process, the blind spots, the human cost of procedural indifference. She described the loneliness of being presumed guilty and the complexity of being proven innocent too late. People listened. Some shifted uncomfortably, others nodded, eyes dark with recognition. Standing there, telling her story, she felt something settle within her that had been restless for months. Purpose, not the kind handed to you by a job title or an ID badge, but one forged through loss and insight. She wasn't naive anymore. She knew the risks of speaking. She knew how easily narratives could turn. But she also knew silence had nearly destroyed her once, and she would not let it do so again. Years later, when people asked her how she survived it, she never gave a simple answer, because survival hadn't been a single act of strength. It had been a series of choices made while afraid, choosing to keep going, choosing to tell the truth even when it changed nothing at first, choosing to believe her worth hadn't been defined by a system that failed her. She still followed rules where they made sense. She still believed in honesty, in accountability, in care. But now those beliefs were tempered by awareness, by the understanding that justice requires vigilance, not blind trust, that systems must be questioned to remain humane, that people are more than the roles they occupy or the accusations they carry. And sometimes, late at night, when the city was quiet and the world felt temporarily at peace, she would think back to that woman in the kitchen, standing by the kettle on a calm morning she thought would be like any other. She felt tenderness for her certainty, for her belief that nothing could go wrong if she did everything right. She knew now how wrong that belief had been. And yet, she was still standing, not because the world had been fair to her, not because the truth emerged quickly, not because the system redeemed itself, but because she had learned painfully and completely that even when everything falls apart, a person can choose to gather the pieces and become something stronger, sharper, and more awake than before. In the end, there was no single moment where everything neatly returned to balance, no dramatic apology that healed the damage, no closing scene where justice felt complete. Life didn't offer her that kind of clarity. What it offered instead was something quieter and far harder to accept. The truth that some wounds never disappear. They simply become part of how you understand the world. She came to realize that the story wasn't about a false accusation alone. It was about how quickly certainty can turn into suspicion, how easily systems forget the human cost of their decisions, and how fragile a reputation becomes once doubt is introduced. It was about how trust, once broken, doesn't shatter loudly. It erodes grain by grain until there's nothing solid left to stand on. But it was also about resilience that doesn't announce itself, about strength that doesn't look like triumph, but endurance, the kind of strength that keeps going when validation never arrives, when apologies feel incomplete, when closure remains out of reach. She learned that surviving injustice doesn't make you invincible. It makes you aware. It teaches you to see cracks where others see certainty, to listen when others dismiss, to question narratives that arrive too easily packaged and ready to believe. She never got back the life she lost, but she gained something she hadn't known she needed: ownership of her voice, the ability to speak without asking permission, the courage to stand in uncertainty and still tell the truth. And in doing so, she quietly became something more powerful than she had ever planned to be. Not a symbol, not a victim, not a cautionary tale, but a living reminder that dignity can endure even when justice falters. Long after the accusations faded from memory, long after names and details blurred, what remained was the echo of her story in others, in those who learned to pause before judging, in those who found words for their own silenced experiences, in those who realized too late how easy it is to be wrong and how necessary it is to care. And that is where her story truly ends. Not with everything fixed, not with the world made fair, but with a woman who refused to disappear when she was most convenient to erase, still standing, still speaking, still human, still here.